Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my presentation about democratizing 3D in apparel with Unreal Engine pixel streaming. First, quick intro about myself and the company I work for. I work for this company called Theodo. We're a product software agency. We build like web applications, mobile applications, all sorts of software. We have about 700 people on our team. And we are based out of London, Paris, Casablanca, and New York City. I joined the company about 11 years ago, coming from the one at the bottom right, coming from Renault, a car manufacturing company. And I'm actually a mechanical engineer by training. I was told I should not say that I'm French, because it's always obvious French people are French. To top it all, I used to work for a French car manufacturing company. But I moved to the US 6 years ago. And about 5 years ago, I started focusing the work I do at Theodo on the apparel and footwear industry. And so this presentation is really a reflection on that journey and how we expanded the work with several brands in that space. You see a few customers that we work with, so there's like many industries, not just footwear and apparel, but I mostly specialize on that. So people have been making apparel for a long time. I couldn't easily find an actual date, but it seems obvious that it gets cold everywhere. So these are very old needles, like some are like over 30,000 years old. So you can imagine the way they used to make apparel back then. It's probably quite different than the way it is done today. So how is apparel, or how are apparel and footwear manufactured, like created today? I will say this differs a lot from even one company to another. Yesterday we had a presentation about LVMH, where they do have fashion houses where they make things in a way that will be different from a more mainstream brand. But the idea is kind of always the same. There's these 4 pillars. The first one is planning. So you have to plan to decide what are we going to create, like what will make it into our collection next year. And to decide on that, oftentimes you look at, okay, what sold well last year? What are the trends, upcoming trends? So it's the planning phase. Then there's the creation phase. And naively, when you think about designing apparel, you think of designers. Oh, cool, there's a person like sitting at their desk, and they come up with an idea, and they're going to design a new piece of apparel. That's what I thought. But no, it all comes from planning and market data. So on the create phase, I really had this idea coming in 5 years ago. You're sitting at your desk and you do everything about a specific garment. But in actuality, like the actual process involves way more people than one might think. There's people that specialize in only color design or only material design or placing graphics, designing the graphics themselves. So there's a lot of creative people involved. And there's a very wide breadth of products. So I think for companies like Ralph Lauren, for example, this is the first example that comes to mind. They have several thousand products per year on their line. So it takes a lot of people to design a big collection like that. And then once you've designed things, you have to make them. And it's actually, I'm describing this as a sequence of events, but the reality is that there's a lot of feedback. And you always, the actions of a product developer, which is basically the person that turns a design into something that you can manufacture, they will give feedback to the designers and maybe the merchandisers, and that will impact the line and so the plan. So there's a constant back and forth between all these people. And once you have figured out how to make something that was designed and you want to make it good quality so it lasts a long time, as long as possible, eventually you're going to need to sell it. And again, like Sales, you think of sales associates and people who, like in the stores, and people who maintain an e-commerce website, but the reality is way more complex. Like most brands are not direct to consumer, they sell through a diversity of channels. And there are like very different aspects depending on which geography you're working in. So like the diversity, like this is a very strong simplification of the amount of people involved in all these activities. So it's a very complex process with many people. But the key idea is all they talk about and all they do is about a product, one product. And you can think of a product as just a concept, like my pair of shoes. And this concept goes from hand to hand across the organization. And then I think maybe one of the most recent additions to this crowd of people involved are the 3D artists. And there are companies where there are no 3D artists, companies where there's a ton of outside 3D artists at agencies, other companies have their 3D artists on staff. And that brings many questions, including like, so where do they fit? Who do they work for? Who do they help? What's the point? And there are companies that don't use any 3D and do really well. There are companies that are convinced that they need to do 3D and they struggle to deploy it. And then leadership changes and they say, actually, we don't need it. Let's just remove everything we tried to deploy. So it's a big change. It's not straightforward. And I think Neil yesterday from LVMH explained that pretty well. But the ideal scenario is that there is a 3D artist that, based on some inputs from product designers, will design a 3D model of a product. And wouldn't it be nice if every person who is involved in the life cycle of the product could look at the 3D asset and could look at the actual thing until it becomes real. And even when it's real, it's more convenient to have a huge library of photorealistic representations of all your products rather than being in a room with all your products to see what they're like. The reality today is like very far from this. Many people who are involved in the product lifecycle, they just never see the product. They see Excel spreadsheets and like obscure systems that are very complex. But the introduction of 3D is a first step into democratizing great quality visualization, like bringing visuals about what you're talking about. Like these companies, they are here to make products, but most people don't even see the products when they work on it. So can't we leverage, or how can we leverage these 3D assets that now exist to bring better visualizations to everyone involved? Like I said, at some point I touched on it, like think of it as the concept of this product from the very beginning, the creation of the concept to the consumer, and it moves hand to hand throughout the whole organization. Today, probably an account executive is going to look at spreadsheets with weird numbers that reference a product. They never really see a visual. With the idea of introducing something called product data interoperability, we say, okay, this account executive I just mentioned, they have a big spreadsheet with numbers like amounts of certain products they're going to sell to a certain account for a certain amount. And that information is data about the product that is in a silo, captive in one spreadsheet, and maybe there's 5 copies of it in 5 different mailboxes. Every person on this diagram has access to its own maybe 1 or 2 or 3 silos of data that all contain data about that same product that are completely disjointed. So it's kind of the visualization part is kind of the tip of the iceberg. You realize very easily that all these people that talk about and work for like creating products every day rarely see the product, but also because the visualization doesn't flow around, and visualization is just one data point. Like how something looks is just one data point about that thing. There's how much it weighs, how much it costs to make, how much you're going to sell it in France or in Germany or somewhere else. So all these data points are today, just like pictures, they are segregated, like they're siloed across different systems. And it takes a lot of time to actually synchronize those silos. We call that meetings, for example, or email chains. That's how we synchronize data silos today. So let's simplify the diagram a bit so we can focus on the creators, the designers, different kinds of designers. This will be easier to reason about. So this is how they work today. Probably extremely simplified. It's a bit of a mess. But yeah, so you have a 3D artist that created a 3D asset in some 3D package. Then there's like all the designers are going to take that 3D asset and do something with it. One is going to create color ups. Another one's going to put graphics on it. Another one's going to change the materials. And they all create so many copies of that same asset. So you end up having terabytes and terabytes of 3D files that are extremely hard to keep track of. And then maybe there's another 3D artist that is going to create another version of the 3D asset to display to a customer on an e-commerce website or in an in-store experience. So what does that create? Like, it's the same idea of the silo. You have multiple versions of everything, and they drift. So if a change is made by one type of designer, maybe the other type of designer has something to say about it, and you never really know if you should trust what you're looking at. As the person who manages the line, for example, how do you know when you're going to review the line, you're actually reviewing the line? You're reviewing an incomplete picture an imperfect picture of the line, but you kind of have to trust it. And it's a big deal to review your line. It's days and days of preparation of everyone like running after the assets, putting them in a nice presentation, and then we can make decisions on them. So this is really the symptom of the lack of data interoperability. Big waste of time and resources, and sometimes horror stories of low quality products that hit the market. And so we focused on the designers, but it's no better in the other pillars of the company. Everyone uses Excel, or everyone can use Excel. So there's lots of people putting a ton of data in Excel, but there's also specialized tools at every stage of the life cycle. And these tools are as many silos that contain data that doesn't spread across the company. So it's very difficult, for example, when you look at your line plan and you ask a question about something related to the sales, you don't necessarily have that data right there and then, so then it delays decisions. And then you add Zoom and Outlook on top of it, you send emails about all these things, so there's copies of everything everywhere. Okay, so how do we make this thing happen? What is possible? Like, how do we make everyone contribute to a streamlined evolution of the product from concept to consumer? Well, we just add more tools, right? There's this great solution, like we built an amazing tool and it's going to solve all the problems for that design team. So just one more tool. It's a natural instinct to just create new tools to solve the problems you have. New, very complex platforms that cost a ton to build. But as Neil mentioned yesterday in his presentation, like bringing a new tool means you're bringing change in the way people work. And even though a way of working might be so terrible, like copying data from one spreadsheet to another, adding final version 1 at the end of the file name, and then sending it to your boss, and then you know what I'm talking about. Even though it can be so painful, it is hard to make people change the way they work. So what's well, here's an example of a tool we built for the Vans footwear team. So that's one big tool that connects to many different systems that is targeted specifically at color designers and material designers. And we built it in partnership with the Epic Games team. I have a short video. So I'm going to show you how this sort of connects all the different silos of data about that product for that specific team. We're zooming in on the color and material designers. So you work on what are called colorways. So there are projects about a product. So cool. This is all test data. So no secret products I'm going to reveal or whatever. And so yeah, so you open a project, you see a 3D visualization of it. You have all the details about that colorway. You have photorealistic renders that are created on the fly when you save your project. Anyone in the company that should have access to it has access to it. So it's connected to the authentication system, internal authentication system at VF Corporation. The part names, another example of data interoperability. How you talk about things is different from one team to another. So in this case, the parts of the shoe are named consistently between all the different systems this connects to. So it makes sure when two people are talking about something, they are using the same words to describe it. Same thing, same idea of like centralization of color libraries, material libraries. So it's one big tool that connects to different platforms where data is centralized with the goal of speeding up the way we create products, or if not speeding it up, at least making it more reliable. So in the time you have, you can just iterate more and come up with better things. This goes on, I'll just skip. All right, so I showed this to a friend one day, Dawood, and he told me, it's great, it's one more tool, and I know from experience that changing the workflows of designers is really hard. So I really like this tool, it's really interesting, but I bet it's pretty hard to make people adopt it. And he was right. And it's hard to accept that when you've spent years building something really complex, it's actually hard to get anyone to sort of care about it. Maybe caring is okay, but then really adopting it, like it's another thing. So having this discussion, we're like, cool, let's meet the designers where they are. You're right. Let's not try to force new tools down their throats that they don't want to use. They like their own way of doing things. And it's not all as terrible as like duplicating data between two spreadsheets via an email chain. So let's meet them where they are. Where are they? So these are some of the activities that people involved on product development have to do. But let's focus on the designer at the top. So this designer, of course, again, like take myself, my ignorant self 5 years ago. Cool, a designer is sitting at their desk and they use their design tool because they're a designer and they design new products, and then it's the end of the day and they go home and they come back the next day and they design products again. But actually, no, that's not what they do. They design products and then they have to fill out information about what they designed into other systems. And they hate those systems. And the same way, and for example, let's look at the product lifecycle management. Incredibly crucial database that contains all the recipes of how all the products that company makes. It explains how they're all made. So for example, at L'Oreal, they have billions of recipes of things that they make, that they thought of, they invested money in coming up with the recipe. Not all of them hit the market, but it's all stored in one database. So in the age of artificial intelligence, where, again, like a well-known idea, like your AI model is only as good as the data you fed it, the product lifecycle management system is a great source of data to do good stuff with AI. But these systems, they are very, very hard to use. They're very complex, and they were adopted initially in like the aerospace industry, the automotive industry, to make things that are very complex. As someone from Boeing once said at a conference, an airplane is 2 million parts flying in close formation, and a shoe is, I think it's like 50 parts or something. Yeah, so incomparable. So when you use a software that was used to describe the recipe of an airplane, but you use it to just describe the recipe of a shoe, it's massive overkill, and it's really difficult for people who have to use it to start adopting it, understanding what they're doing. So this designer creates a new design, has to go in the PLM, makes updates about it, creates screenshots or renders of the product, puts it in the digital asset management system to centralize all the pictures. And now it's the end of the day. And in one day, they did actually 5 times less than what I thought they would be doing, because they just do so many other things. So ideally, what we would like them to be doing is work on designing new products and then have some sort of thing that integrates all the tools that contain product data, integrate it all together. Because everything I described, like saying you were in Clo and you changed the material of the sleeves of this jacket. If I can say it, and if you can see it in Clo, it means there are bits, like literal like zeros and ones that describe it. So there is data that knows this thing. The data knows I changed the materials on my sleeves. So why does a human have to take that data, translate it into other zeros and ones into another system so that someone else can look at it? We can probably build a sort of piping, smart pipes that just take that information. Oh, there's a new design that was created, or this design that existed yesterday was updated today. This part changed. Let's go change the recipe in the product lifecycle management system. And let's also just trigger a rendering pipeline, and let's send the renders in the right spot, and so on. And with all those renders, let's update the line plan so that the boss is less stressed, the person who has to check the line plan, and that all the teams are developing the right products. They just know where everyone's at. So that's a super ideal view. This is extremely simplified because it's not 5 systems that are involved. I think there's a study that shows that about 30 design applications in any company that makes apparel that are involved at different stages. So it's a very complex to solve, but you don't have to solve it all at once. What does that concretely mean? So let's take an example of, okay, you use 2D design software and 3D design software, very classic in apparel. So at the top would be Clo or Browseware. At the bottom would be Adobe Illustrator is used a lot. When a change happens in one of these systems, you have to change that system, and it's less and less true. Like Clo or Browseware provide plugins that already connect to your PLM or your digital asset management system. So you can, but if these don't exist for your system, you can build a plugin that detects data changes, product data changes, and just propagates them to a central hub. And that hub knows when this product changes, I know it's in this collection, so I'm going to have to create renders and then send them on this line plan. Same goes with the 2D software. So in a way, you can like make up any sentence with any of these systems that need to talk to each other and any of the activities you do in them. So typically, that poor designer that created a new design, they have to figure out where to put that file that they just created, that 3D file. Where do I put it? A machine knows better and will do it faster than you. So directly from your design software, if you know you're working on this specific identifier that's on the line plan that your boss told you design this pair of pants, 1, 2, 3, then it will just store the file in the right place. So here's an example of that, bringing pixel streaming, so Unreal Engine pixel streaming visuals directly inside Adobe Illustrator. Okay, so designers, color designers specifically in this case, they like to work on 2D sketches. Like they were not trained to be 3D artists. And a lot of what they do is work on line arts. So Adobe Illustrator files, vector graphics that describe shapes, which are, it's all data. So these 2D shapes are a projection of a 3D shape. And there's no reason we can't map the name of that 2D shape to the name of that 3D shape in any 3D engine. And so concretely, when this person here is, and it's me doing this, so forgive my lack of design skills. I have to say it every time. So when they make a change, again, it's all zeros and ones. Adobe Illustrator has the data to show you that 2D representation of the thing you're designing. So as a software engineer, I should be able to build a pipe that takes that data, and the data point being the C here is now red. I can take that event, translate it, and send it to a system that then will translate it again and tell Unreal Engine, this bunch of polygons here, this mesh, this material on this mesh, it is now red. And so that's what happens in the couple hundred milliseconds delay that you have here. You make a change in 2D, and it is reflected in 3D. And this is exactly what Dawood was referring to, as in like he had really done something similar in a previous job when he said meeting the designers where they are. It's what do you want? You want designers who only know 2D, and even if they know 3D, maybe they just want to keep working the way they work. You want to give them access to a better representation of what they're doing today. Because what that brings is much faster feedback loops, designer doing a better job because they realize, yeah, maybe under these lighting conditions, these two colors don't work together. So there's no limit to that, like the photorealism we can achieve with Unreal Engine, so you can really push it extremely far. The quality of the feedback you get as a color designer just working on a pair of sneakers. There are constraints though, because I, as a software engineer, I'm like, all right, I do have to find a way to map this shape in the 2D file to this shape in the 3D file. So how do I call this shape? And I shouldn't be the person deciding how a shape, how a piece of a shoe is called. The person that decides that, actually I don't know who it is, but the source of truth, to me, is in the product lifecycle management system. So it's really important that you interconnect these bits of information so that everyone is talking about the same thing, and so that any representation of your product, be it a line in your account management sheet where you're selling products to Macy's and other retailers. So it can be that data representation of your product can be a line in a spreadsheet, it can be a 3D model, it can be a render, it can be a 2D file, or maybe even a sketch. You want all these representations of that one thing to be consistent so that you can trust them at every step of the way. There's a lot of waste in the industry where people work on something and realize they actually had the wrong input. Someone had updated the input, but the email chain didn't make it to them, or they just even didn't remember to take the latest one. All right, so this might get a little bit boring if you're not interested in this, but I'll explain it. I hope it will be interesting to some people. So at the top, the big rectangle, it all happens inside Adobe Illustrator. And that's really one key misconception in pretty much any industry, is that Adobe products are not very extensible. They are extensible. There's actually a framework called the Common Extensibility Platform, CEP, that allows you to come into pretty much any Adobe product. And so here, Adobe Illustrator, and from within a plugin, so this little rectangle here is a custom plugin. You can install any plugin that you've created with IT restrictions that I will not talk about. And that plugin has access to the data. It has access to the shapes, to the colors, the materials you applied, the stroke width, or whatever you want. It can listen to events that are happening in the application, and it can make actions. So you can even automate some of the work. So a typical use case, before the line review, you create huge sheets of the views of all your products, and you have people spending a lot of time aligning them. You can automate all of that. So this is the part about the data. So you can add a piece of code, actually 2 pieces of code, it has to be 2, that have access to the data about what's happening, what's the user doing inside Illustrator. Then once you have this data, the visual part is just a website. There's actually, you can just embed a website into a pane, a little panel in Adobe Illustrator, and you can move it around, do whatever you want. It can be super big, can be super small, can display text, you can, I don't know, watch TV shows while you're working, I don't know, whatever you want. So it's just pure HTML, JavaScript. And the pretty interesting part is that your plugin can come with a backend, so like a server code that will run inside Adobe Illustrator. So there are constraints, you cannot do any code, but you can build a Node.js server that will run inside Adobe Illustrator. So it's all on the user's device. So your plugin, it's not like it's a web application and you have to be online to be able to use it. You can have a very complex logic that runs on the user's laptop right inside Illustrator. So why not display photorealistic 3D? Well, because the laptop might not be super powerful. Like if I'm a color designer, I probably didn't get a gaming laptop from my IT department. But because we can do whatever we want, we can probably stream content from the cloud from a beefier machine. And so that's what we do. The data connection between the actual design layer in Adobe Illustrator is then forwarded onto a very conventional pixel streaming infrastructure, as explained by the Epic team. So you have in the cloud your super beefy infrastructure that can run any Unreal Engine project. So basically, in this case, it's pretty much like any product configurator, because the idea is you're not going to play around, you're not going to jump into the shoe and start destroying it with a gun. You just want to look at it. And when product data changes, such as this part is now red, you want to propagate that event, just like a car configurator does, to then change the visualization, and that visualization streams back into Adobe Illustrator. And that's a few dozen kilobytes per second of video stream, so super lightweight. And it looks extremely good. You don't need to have a strong laptop. And one really key element is that you can use an extremely heavy 3D asset. So you can use the same 3D asset that the 3D designer created in the first place, which can be hundreds and hundreds of megabytes heavy. And what's really great about having all that happen in the cloud is that the amount of data coming out of Illustrator into the cloud and out of the cloud into Illustrator is really minimal. Here we send a few kilobytes or even bytes whenever a product data change happens. You send that product data change and you have your hundreds of megabytes of 3D asset. It's completely white over white, you don't see it. There's a white sneaker right there. And Unreal Engine is running in the cloud, super close to your very heavy 3D assets. So loading the models happen very fast. And you apply the changes and you send the video stream back onto the laptop. So let's go back to our sort of starting point of that vision of data interoperability. What does that give us? So we said, all right, with the goal we have in mind is let's give everyone involved in product creation and sales, and it's not just creation, it's like sales associates in the stores. If they have amazing visualizations of products at hand, they can show something that is not available in store, but that is still convincing enough that a customer might want to buy it. So this end goal of having everyone have reliable, true to life, like very good looking representations of products throughout the development cycle. And so the sort of centerpiece is, and the answer to this is say, cool, let's have everyone connected to the cloud, so you don't have to, and maybe not everyone, because maybe, I mean, you do want the 3D designer to be working on a beefy machine because they need like sub-millisecond feedback when they make a change, not 100 millisecond feedback. But everyone else can be connected to only one 3D asset, instead of like dozens and dozens of copies of 3D assets. One version, when the 3D artist updates it, everyone who's looking at it, because it's stored in a central place, you can simply, you see the update. And everyone either like makes changes to it, so separating, what we do is separate, remember how I said like, it's all about data, and a 3D model is a data point about a product, such as like just the same way a render is a data point, but also the recipe in the PLM is also a data point. So which part is made of what? So if you store separately the which part is made of what from the 3D model, when the 3D model changes, and I'm not saying like adding new parts, but if you change the shape of a part, you can, at runtime, when someone needs to look at it, you can reapply the recipe to the 3D model. So the person who's looking at it, they don't even have to know the 3D model changed, but they can trust it is reliable. All right, so again, yellow and white, poor choice of colors, but here the idea is the same thing we built, that small plugin in Illustrator, which is a pretty dumb web application running inside Adobe Illustrator, connecting to a powerful backend that can render and combine prog data and 3D models together. So that would be, let's say, what I showed you is one of these like little user interfaces here. Each person involved in the lifecycle of the product could have its own pretty stupid web application that does what they need to do. So for example, that person needs to change colors, another person needs to change materials, another person needs to just see all the products, that person needs to be able to watch good visuals or animations of products. They don't all need the same thing, but the things they need tend to be pretty simple. So you can, by really externalizing the very complex part, which is making something that looks good, and simply seeing each interface as a small interface to update data about the product, you can create these cheaper, small interfaces that are adapted to the users. And you want to meet the users where they are. So for example, your sales team, you can embed 3D views of the product line inside the sales tools if that's something that you think will bring value. You can embed 3D, and it's quite costly, but Unreal Engine pixel streaming renders of your product in your e-commerce website without tremendously changing your e-commerce website. The list goes on. So going further, and I'm almost over, you can basically build in any application, embed super high fidelity visuals. So actually I should have the two slides side by side. What changed is you replace Illustrator, which is the example I showed, with any application. Just make sure visuals can come in and product data changes can come out. Send all that to the cloud or wherever you want. That is centralized. You can also store there, and it's quite important, your like material libraries, your library of 3D assets, your color libraries, your whatever libraries of data that are valuable to your company, and combine them at display time to make sure you never rely on potentially outdated renders or outdated duplicate 3D files that have been shared on a shared drive. Voila, that's the idea. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm yours.